کنفرانس در پارلمان انگلستان، بزرگداشت روز جهانی حقوق بشر و حمایت از مقاومت و مبارزه مردم ایران، قسمت آخر.
سخنرانی‌های لرد دیوید آلتون، عضو ارشد مجلس اعیان، پروفسور سارا چندلر، رئیس سابق کمیته حقوق بشر کانون وکلای انگلستان و ولز، رئیس سابق فدراسیون حقوقدانان اروپا، لورن لودرل، حقوقدان برجسته دادگاه‌های بین‌المللی، آنتیا مکینتایر، نماینده پیشین پارلمان اروپا، رئیس پیشین هیئت محافظه‌کاران در پارلمان اروپا، دکتر جاسلین اسکات، نویسنده، استاد دانشگاه و قاضی پیشین.
لرد دیوید آلتون: رژیم ایران من و همکارانم در پارلمان را به دلیل جرأت بیان و برگزاری جلسات تحریم کرده است. این یک تلاش بیهوده برای خاموش کردن صدای دموکراسی است. زنان دلیر ایران و کانون‌های شورشی اپوزیسیون دموکراتیک که پیش از این خانم رجبی به آنها اشاره کرد را به دلیل چالش کشیدن قوانین سرکوبگرانه رژیم برای گسترش قیام و ضدیت با رژیم باید تحسین کرد.
Hello, Madam Rajivi. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. I'll say a moment. It's 40 years since I first organized a meeting at a political conference on behalf of the Iranian resistance. And it's been an honor for me over the years as we commemorate over this last weekend two hugely important documents passed within 24 hours of one another, linked by a sort of umbilical cord, one being the Universal Declaration of Human Rights with its 30 articles, which adumbrate the huge human rights issues that had come to the fore, not least through the Holocaust and all the other horrors the world had experienced, and the need to say this should not only not happen again, but these are the ingredients that will make for a free and good society. And in addition to that, in 1948, they passed the Convention on the Crime of Genocide. Why? Because 6 million Jewish people and others from different minorities, merely because they were different, had lost their lives in the Holocaust. Now, we've all seen that the best times during these intervening years, those documents and those hugely important human rights statements have delivered world order. They have created the circumstances in which individuals, minorities, communities, countries could flourish. But in bad times, we've also seen the opposite. And I was very struck when thinking about whether Ibrahim Raisi would have the right to be able to go to Geneva to speak at the conference there. So for me, the issue is irrelevant as to whether the regime is driven by secular ideologies or religious ideologies. If they're driven by ideologies that trample on human rights, if they try to suppress plurality, if they prevent people from being able to grow in their own ideals and to flourish with their own human rights, then they should be resisted, which is why the IRGC certainly should be, as Bob Blackman and everybody else has said during these proceedings, be prescribed in the UK. I'd also just mention before saying something a bit more about what's happening in Iran at the present moment, that the architecture of 1948, these great documents, have to be made vivid again in our own times. We have to breathe new life into them. If there isn't world order, and if there is no basis on which we can call up the ideas and the ideals of people like Eleanor Roosevelt in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or for that matter, the Convention on the Crime of Genocide, where did that come from? It came from the authorship of Raphael Lemkin, a Jewish Polish lawyer who'd seen 49 of his own family murdered in the Holocaust. And he gave us the word genocide, genus and side, coming from the Latin and the Greek, meaning the cutting of the human family, the killing of the human family, the destruction of individual groups of people merely because they chose to be different in some way or another. And we can see that happening on a daily basis in Iran. Go back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where it says, whereas it is essential if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, human rights must be protected by the rule of law. And as Madam Rajavi has told us today, and as documented by the UN Special Rapporteur on Iran, Javed Rahman, who's been referred to by my good friend Baroness O'Lone, and a meeting which featured Professor Rahman took place here in Parliament just a few weeks ago. But his remarks have been echoed by Amnesty, who say the regime is trying to suffocate civil society, women, students, and the democratic opposition through repression. And as Lord Carlyle has said, it even comes down to execution where it suits the regime. Ever since the theocracy usurped power in 1979 by stealing the popular democratic revolution, the judiciary has been used as a tool of oppression, and the paramilitary IRGC has been a used tool of terror, eliminating pro-democracy forces and dissenting voices, both at home and abroad. And I count in that number colleagues like myself who have been now sanctioned by the Iranian regime for daring to speak out and holding meetings of this kind. This is a crude attempt to try and silence the voice of democracy and parliamentarians. The reality, of course, is that the regime has closed all venues of opposition through parliamentary and political activity. What it does at home, it tries to do abroad as well. The people of Iran are forced to live under religious tyranny and oppression. The regime's laws restrict Iranian people's fundamental rights and freedoms, and they're left with no other recourse but to rebel through popular uprising to realize their democratic aspirations, to enjoy their fundamental rights and their freedoms. And in this regard, as Lady O'Lone has said, we must applaud the brave women of Iran and the resistance units of the democratic opposition referred to by Madam Rajavi earlier on, for challenging the regime's repressive laws and defying its oppression to expand the uprising and anti-regime activities and protests. I would simply end by referring to the 10-point plan. If it was all about saying no, if it was all about the denunciation of the regime, that would be not good enough. But the NCRI has been to the fore in spelling out what it would do if it had the opportunity to govern freely and fairly in Iran. And I would commend that to anybody. And unfortunately, there are people who say, well, would the NCRI be any different? Of course, the answer is it would be the total opposite of everything that has gone before. And we've got to spell that out and make sure that our colleagues in Parliament, finally, our government should lead allies at the United Nations to demand Iran's United Nations Special Rapporteur, Javed Rahman, and the UN fact-finding mission a chance to visit the Iranian prisons and meet with political prisoners and detained protesters, as the NCRI has called for again and again. And I urge our government to set an example globally by cutting diplomatic relations with a regime that continues to carry out the kind of obscenities that we have seen over this last year until it ends executions, releases all political prisoners, releases detained protesters and dual citizens, and verifiably scraps the discriminatory and repressive laws against women and the Iranian people. Thank you for inviting me to speak.